The blood-red sunset painted the Colorado sky as Yates Gallagher slumped against the weathered wall of the Veta saloon, pressing a dirty handkerchief to the bullet wound in his side. His breath came in ragged gasps as he watched the last rays of daylight disappear behind the Spanish peaks. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, and the wound that had started as a mere graze had festered into something that might just kill him if the men tracking him didn't get to him first. Veta, Colorado, 1879, was supposed to be just another stop on his journey west, a place to rest before continuing on to nowhere in particular. But fate had different plans. "Mister, you're bleeding all over my porch," a stern female voice called out. Yates tugged his hat lower, hiding the pain etched across his face. The hat, a battered, wide-brimmed Stetson, had been his shield against the world for years now. It hid his expressions, his fears, and now, the fever that was surely showing in his eyes. "I'll move along," he managed to say, his voice gravelly from thirst. "Like hell you will." The woman stepped closer, her skirts rustling against the wooden planks. "You'll die right there if you don't get help." Yates didn't look up. Better than dying somewhere else. He heard her sigh, then felt gentle hands prying the blood-soaked handkerchief away from his wound. Despite his determination to remain aloof, he winced. "This needs tending," she said, her voice softer now. "I've got a room upstairs. I don't need charity. Good, because I'm not offering any. $2 a night for the room, another $1 for me to patch you up." There was a pause. "Unless you prefer I call the sheriff to scrape your corpse off my porch tomorrow morning." Reluctantly, Yates lifted his gaze from beneath his hat brim. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25, with copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her green eyes were direct, appraising him without judgment. "Name's Clara Montgomery. I own this establishment." She gestured to the modest saloon behind her. Yates weighed his options, which were few. The men after him would be in town by tomorrow if they weren't already, but the alternative was bleeding out in the street. "Yates," he mumbled. "Yates Gallagher." "Well, Mr. Gallagher, can you walk or do I need to find someone to carry you?" Pride made him struggle to his feet, though the world swam dangerously around him. "I can walk." Clara slipped her shoulder under his arm, supporting more of his weight than he wanted to admit he needed. As they slowly made their way through the saloon, thankfully quiet at this early evening hour, she said, "You don't have to hide behind that hat, you know. Whatever's chasing you, it ain't in my saloon." Yates didn't respond, focusing instead on not passing out as they climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. Clara's room was simple but clean, with a bed, washstand, and small desk. She eased him onto the edge of the bed. "Shirt off," she ordered, moving to the washstand where she poured water into a basin. Yates hesitated, then slowly peeled away his blood-stiffened shirt, revealing the angry wound on his left side. Clara returned with the basin and clean cloths. "Bullet still in there?" "No, went through." She nodded, then began cleaning the wound with a gentleness that belied her businesslike tone. "You going to tell me who shot you?" "Rather not." "Fair enough." She worked in silence for a moment. "But I should warn you there's not much that happens in Veta that I don't hear about. This town might look sleepy, but news travels." Yates kept his hat on, eyes shadowed. "Then you'll understand why I'll be moving on as soon as I can. With this infection, you won't make it 10 miles. She applied a pungent salve to the wound that made him hiss through his teeth. "You need rest, clean bandages, and food, at least 3 days. Don't have 3 days. Clara finished bandaging his side, then stood back, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Mr. Gallagher, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, and frankly, I don't much care. But I've seen enough men die needlessly to know you're heading that way if you ride out of here tomorrow." She crossed to a small cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. After pouring generous measures in both, she handed one to Yates. "Drink. It'll help with the pain." He accepted the glass but made no move to remove his hat. Clara sat on the room's single chair studying him. "You don't have to hide from me," she said quietly. Yates looked up, meeting her gaze directly for the first time. "Madam, with all due respect, hiding's kept me alive this long." "And how's that working for you?" She nodded toward his bandaged side. Despite himself, Yates felt a ghost of a smile touch his lips. He tipped his hat back slightly, letting her see his face properly, the deep-set blue eyes, the scar that ran along his jawline, the several days' worth of dark beard. "Been better days," he admitted, then downed the whiskey in one swallow. Clara nodded, satisfied. "Now we're getting somewhere. I'll have food sent up. You rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." As she turned to leave, Yates called after her. "Why are you helping me?" Clara paused at the door, her expression unreadable. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be running from something." Then she was gone, closing the door softly behind her. Yates stared at the empty glass in his hand, wondering what exactly he'd gotten himself into, and whether Clara Montgomery was his salvation or would be his downfall. The fever took hold during the night. Yates drifted in and out of consciousness, aware sometimes of a cool cloth on his forehead, other times of a gentle voice urging him to drink water. By morning, the worst had passed, but he felt as weak as a newborn colt. He opened his eyes to find sunlight streaming through faded curtains, and Clara sitting in the chair beside the bed, her copper hair loose around her shoulders as she mended what appeared to be his shirt. "Welcome back," she said, not looking up from her stitching. "You had me worried for a while there." Yates tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "How long was I out?" "Most of the night." She set aside her sewing and handed him a glass of water. "Your fever broke around dawn." He drank deeply, then asked, "Anyone come looking for me?" Clara's expression grew serious. 3 men rode in late last night, asked around about a wounded man. I told my bartender to say he hadn't seen anyone matching that description." Yates closed his eyes briefly. "They'll search the town, probably. But you're not in the saloon, you're in my private quarters above my office behind the saloon. Different entrance entirely." She smiled slightly. "I've had reason to be discreet about visitors before." He raised an eyebrow at that, but she didn't elaborate. "Thank you," he said simply. Clara nodded, then stood. "There's food on the table when you feel up to it. I need to open the saloon. Try to rest and stay away from the windows." After she left, Yates managed to get to his feet long enough to eat the bread, cheese, and cold meat she'd left. His strength was returning, but he knew he was in no condition to ride. The thought of being trapped, of bringing danger to Clara's door, gnawed at him. He'd never intended to stay in one place long enough for people to become collateral damage in his problems. The day passed slowly. Yates dozed, listened to the muffled sounds of the saloon below, and tried not to think about what would happen when Harlan Reed and his men inevitably found him. Through it all, his hat sat on the bedpost, the first time in months he'd willingly been without it for so long. As evening approached, Clara returned, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of stew. "You're looking better," she observed, setting the tray on his lap once he'd managed to sit up against the headboard. "Feel better," he admitted. "Any sign of trouble?" She shook her head. "They spent the day drinking and asking questions. No one's given you up." She hesitated. "But they're not leaving, Yates. They've taken rooms at the hotel." He nodded grimly. "I need to go." "You need to tell me what's happening," she countered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Who are these men and why are they hunting you?" Yates stirred the stew, buying time. He'd spent so long not talking about it that the words felt stuck in his throat. But Clara deserved the truth, especially now that she was harboring him. "I used to ride with them," he finally said. "Harlan Reed's gang did some things I'm not proud of, mostly stealing cattle, robbing stage coaches. Never killed anyone, but—" He shrugged. "Still wrong. What changed? They did, or Harlan did, started talking about bigger scores, didn't care who got hurt." Yates set the spoon down. "6 weeks ago, we hit a bank in Trinidad. It went bad. Harlan shot the teller, didn't need to, man wasn't even resisting. I tried to help him, and Harlan said to leave him." He looked up at Clara. "I couldn't do it anymore. So that night I took my share, plus what was owed to the dead teller's family, and I left. Been running ever since. Harlan caught up with me outside of Walsenburg 3 days ago. I got away, but not before one of his boys put a bullet in me." Clara's face remained composed, but her eyes had softened. "You left them money for the teller's family," Yates nodded. "Didn't make it right, but—" "It's something," she finished for him. After a moment she asked, "What will they do if they find you? Kill me?" "Slowly, probably, as an example." He managed a grim smile. "Harlan doesn't like being betrayed." Clara stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "We need to get you out of here. I'll go tomorrow. I've caused you enough trouble. You're still in no condition to ride far, and they're watching the roads." She stopped pacing, thinking. "I know a place. A line shack about 10 miles west of here in the foothills. It's on my property. I own more land than just this saloon. No one would look for you there." Yates frowned. "Your property," Clara waved a hand dismissively. "My late husband left me more than most people realize. The saloon is just the visible part. I didn't know you were married. Widowed, 2 years now." Her voice was matter of fact. "Walter was a good man, 20 years my senior." Heart gave out. Yates absorbed this information, realizing how little he knew about the woman who was risking so much to help him. "Why are you doing this?" he asked again. Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it most." She headed for the door. "Eat your stew. I'll make arrangements for tomorrow." Before dawn the next morning, Clara helped Yates down the back stairs and into a small wagon covered with supplies. He was stronger but still moved gingerly, the wound pulling with every step. "Stay under those blankets until we're well out of town," she instructed, climbing onto the driver's seat. "I do supply runs to my other properties regularly. No one will question it." The early morning air was crisp as they set off, taking a back route out of Veta. Yates lay still beneath the blankets, listening to the steady clip of the horses' hooves and feeling every bump in the rough road. Once they were well clear of town, Clara called back, "You can come out now." Yates pushed aside the blankets and carefully sat up, holding onto the side of the wagon for support. The mountains rose majestically before them, the Spanish peaks dominating the skyline. "Beautiful country," he commented. Clara nodded. "That's why I stayed after Walter died. Everyone expected me to sell up and go back east, but this is home now." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon climbing steadily into the foothills. The aspen trees were just beginning to turn, spots of gold appearing among the green. "How did you end up in Colorado?" Yates asked eventually. Clara's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Running like you, though from something different." She didn't elaborate immediately, and Yates didn't push. After a few minutes she continued. "I grew up in Boston, good family, proper upbringing. I was engaged to be married to a man my father's age, a business arrangement, really." She glanced back at him. "The night before the wedding, I took what money I had and boarded a train west. Ended up in Denver, working as a hostess in a hotel restaurant. That's where I met Walter." "He brought you to Veta," Clara nodded. "He'd made his fortune in mining, wanted a quieter life. Bought the saloon as an investment, then several other properties. We had 3 good years before he died." She smiled faintly. He taught me everything about running the businesses. Said he didn't want me dependent on anyone if something happened to him. Sounds like a wise man. He was. She paused. What about you? You weren't always an outlaw. Yates settled more comfortably against the supplies. Grew up on a small ranch in Texas. When my parents died, my sister and I tried to keep it going, but the big ranchers wanted our water rights, made life difficult. What happened? They burned us out. My sister Abigail was inside. His voice grew flat. She was 18, I was 22. Clara's face softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, Yates. It was 10 years ago now, he shrugged, though the motion pained him. I drifted after that, worked as a cowhand, then as hired muscle. Eventually fell in with Harlan's crowd. Seemed like justice at the time, taking from the type of men who'd taken everything from me. And now, Yates looked out at the mountains. Now I just want to stop running. Find a quiet corner somewhere, try to live an honest life. Clara didn't respond, but something in her expression had changed, grown thoughtful. They reached the line shack just before noon. It was a simple structure, one room with a stone fireplace, a small barn beside it. But it was solid, nestled in a grove of aspen with a creek running nearby. It's not much, Clara said as she helped Yates down from the wagon. It's perfect, he replied honestly. After months on the run, sleeping rough more often than not, the shack looked like a palace. Clara unloaded supplies, food, medical items, extra blankets while Yates rested on a bench outside the door, frustrated by his inability to help. I've brought enough for a week, she said, arranging things inside. By then, Reed and his men should have moved on, or I can bring more. A week, Yates frowned. Clara, I can't stay here that long, it's too much of an imposition. She emerged from the shack, wiping her hands on her skirt. Would you rather turn yourself in, or try to outride them in your condition? When he didn't answer, she nodded. That's what I thought. Besides, no one uses this place except during hunting season. You're not imposing. Yates watched as she unhitched the horse to let it drink at the creek. The morning sun caught in her hair, turning it to fire. In another life, another time. He pushed the thought away. He had no right to think of Clara that way, not with Harlan Reed breathing down his neck. I'll check on you in a couple of days, she said, returning to hitch up the horse. There's a rifle inside, ammunition too, just in case. Thank you, Yates said, standing with effort. For everything. I don't know how to repay you. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then stepped forward and straightened his hat, which had gone askew. You don't have to hide from me, Yates Gallagher, she said softly. Not behind this hat, and not behind whatever guilt you're carrying. We've all done things we regret. Before he could respond, she climbed onto the wagon and, with a final nod, drove away, leaving Yates standing in the clearing, feeling more exposed than if he'd been standing in the middle of Main Street. The days at the line shack passed slowly. Yates regained his strength gradually, spending mornings tending to his wound and afternoons sitting outside, watching the mountains and thinking about choices that had led him here. By the fourth day, he was able to walk to the creek and back without pain, and on the fifth, he cleaned the rifle, checking its action and sighting down the barrel. Old habits died hard, and he still scanned the approaches to the shack regularly, expecting to see Harlan and his men appear. But the only visitor was Clara, who arrived on the afternoon of the sixth day, her wagon loaded with more supplies. You look better, she said, appraising him as he helped her unload, moving with only a slight stiffness. Feel it, he agreed. How's town? Quiet. Reed and his men left yesterday. Heard they were heading south toward Trinidad. Yates nodded, relief washing through him. It was temporary. Harlan wouldn't give up so easily, but it was something. I brought you these, Clara added, handing him a bundle of clothes. Thought you could use something not stained with blood. The simple kindness caught him off guard. "Thank you." They worked together to store the supplies, moving around each other with an ease that felt oddly domestic. When they finished, Clara built a fire in the fireplace while Yates prepared coffee. "I should be able to ride back to town tomorrow," he said as they sat with their coffee. "Now that Reed's gone," Clara looked into her cup. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. I own another property, a small ranch about 20 miles north of here. The foreman just quit, moved to California." She glanced up at Yates. "It needs someone who knows cattle." Yates stared at her, coffee forgotten. "You're offering me a job, I'm offering you a chance. Same as someone gave me once." She set her cup down. "The ranch is remote enough that Reed wouldn't easily find you, but close enough to town for supplies. You'd have a cabin to yourself, decent wage, Clara." Yates removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she said simply. "Unless you've got better prospects elsewhere," he laughed softly. "Can't say that I do." Then, sobering, he added, "But I need to be honest with you. Harlan won't stop looking, having me near your town, your business. It's a risk." "Life is risk, Mr. Gallagher." She stood, brushing off her skirt. "Think about it. I'll come back tomorrow for your answer." After she left, Yates sat by the fire for a long time, turning his hat in his hands. The prospect of staying, of having somewhere to belong again, was more tempting than he wanted to admit. And if he was being completely honest with himself, Clara Montgomery was a significant part of that temptation. Morning brought clarity. When Clara arrived, Yates was waiting outside, his few possessions packed. "I'll take the job," he said without preamble, "but on one condition." Clara raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "When not if, when Harlan Reed returns, I leave. Immediately, I won't bring danger to your door." She considered this, then nodded. "Agreed. Though I think you underestimate the people of Veta. We take care of our own." "I'm hardly one of your own." Clara's smile was enigmatic. "You might be surprised." They rode north, following game trails through the mountains rather than the main roads. Clara led the way on her horse, with Yates following on a sturdy gelding she'd brought for him. By late afternoon they crested a rise, and the ranch spread out below them, a modest operation with about 100 head of cattle grazing in the valley, a small cabin, barn, and corral near a creek. "It's not much," Clara said, echoing her words from the line shack. "Walter bought it as an investment. I've kept it running, but it could be more productive with the right management." Yates surveyed the property with a cattleman's eye. "Good water, good grass, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms." He nodded approvingly. "It has potential." They rode down to the cabin, which proved to be simple but comfortable. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, solid furniture. It reminded Yates painfully of the ranch he'd grown up on before it had been destroyed. "The previous foreman left things in good order," Clara said as they stabled the horses. "There are 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse near the corral. Good men, been with me for years. They know to expect a new foreman, but not much else." "What did you tell them about me?" "That you worked cattle in Texas, that you're experienced and trustworthy." She gave him a pointed look. "Don't make a liar out of me, Mr. Gallagher." He smiled, touching the brim of his hat. "Yes, madam." Clara stayed for dinner, showing Yates where everything was in the cabin and bringing him up to speed on the ranch operations. As darkness fell, she prepared to leave. "I'll come check on things in a week or so," she said, mounting her horse. "If you need anything before then, send one of the hands to town with a message." Yates stood in the doorway of the cabin, hat in hand. "Clara, I don't know how to thank you." She looked down at him, her expression softening in the twilight. "Make this work. That'll be thanks enough." Then she was gone, riding into the gathering darkness, leaving Yates with an opportunity he hadn't dared hope for and a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. The first month at the ranch passed in a blur of activity. Yates threw himself into the work, grateful for the physical demands that left him too tired to dwell on the past. The wound in his side healed completely, leaving only a puckered scar to remind him of his narrow escape. The two ranch hands brothers named Tom and Frank Wilson were initially wary of the new foreman but warmed to him as they saw his knowledge and willingness to work alongside them. Neither asked about Yates's past, accepting Clara's vouching for him without question. Clara herself visited every week or so, ostensibly to check on the ranch operations but spending most of her time in conversation with Yates. They would sit on the cabin's small porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once had. "You should consider breeding some better stock," Clara said during one visit, as they watched the cattle graze in the valley below. "Those Herefords Walter bought are hardy enough, but their calves don't fetch top dollar at market." Yates nodded. "I've been thinking the same. With a good bull and some selective breeding, we could improve the herd significantly within a few years." Clara smiled slightly. "Getting comfortable here, are you?" He hadn't realized what he'd said until she pointed it out. "Force of habit, I guess, my family's ranch." "I know." She touched his arm briefly. "I like that you're thinking long-term." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went beyond employer and employee. Yates found himself studying her face in the fading light, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled. "I should go," Clara said suddenly, breaking the moment. "It'll be dark soon." Yates walked her to her horse, an inexplicable tension between them that hadn't been there before. As she mounted, he impulsively reached for her hand. "Clara," he began, then faltered, unsure what he wanted to say. She looked down at their joined hands, then at his face. "Yes." Words failed him. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Ride safe." Something like disappointment flickered across her features before she nodded and turned her horse toward town. Yates watched her go, the weight of unspoken words heavy on his chest. That night, sleep eluded him. He paced the cabin, thoughts churning. He was developing feelings for Clara, had been for weeks, if he was honest with himself. But acting on those feelings would be selfish and dangerous. Harlan Reed was still out there, and Yates had no illusions about the man's capacity for vengeance. Clara deserved better than a man with his past, his problems. She'd already risked too much for him. By morning, he'd made a decision. He would maintain a professional relationship with Clara, nothing more. It was the only way to ensure her safety. This resolution lasted exactly 2 weeks, until the first snowfall of the season. Clara arrived at the ranch just as the storm was beginning, heavy flakes swirling in the wind. Yates met her at the barn, concern etched on his face. "You shouldn't have come," he said, helping her unsaddle her horse. "The weather report said this would be a big one." "I wanted to bring supplies before the passes got too difficult," she replied, stamping snow from her boots. "Besides, I've ridden through worse." They hurried to the cabin, the wind picking up behind them. Inside, Yates built up the fire while Clara unpacked the provisions she'd brought: coffee, sugar, flour, and, to his surprise, a bottle of good whiskey. "Thought you might appreciate something to ward off the cold," she explained, setting it on the table. "Join me," he offered, fetching 2 cups. They sat before the fire, the storm howling outside, snow already piling against the windows. The whiskey warmed them from the inside, loosening the careful distance Yates had been maintaining. "I miss this," Clara said, watching the flames dance. "A proper fireplace. My rooms above the saloon have a stove, but it's not the same." "You're welcome here anytime," Yates said, then added quickly, "I mean, it is your property after all." Clara smiled into her cup. "It feels more like yours these days. You've done wonders with the place in just a month." It was true. Yates had repaired fences, reorganized the barn, and started planning improvements to the cattle operation. For the first time since losing his family ranch, he felt a sense of purpose, of building something. "I've been meaning to thank you properly," he said, "for everything. Not just the job, but for saving my life, for believing in me when you had no reason to." Clara set her cup down and turned to face him fully. "You're a good man, Yates Gallagher, despite what you may think of yourself. You don't know all I've done. I know enough." Her gaze was steady. "We're all more than the worst things we've done." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting golden light across Clara's features. Yates found himself leaning toward her, drawn by something stronger than the resolution he'd made. "Clara," he said softly, "I should tell you. There are things about me, about my past." She placed a finger against his lips. "Not tonight. Tonight there's just the storm and this cabin and us." When she removed her finger, Yates caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "Are you sure?" In answer, Clara closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with an intensity that surprised them both. Yates pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair as it came loose from its pins. The storm outside was forgotten as they lost themselves in each other, months of tension and unspoken feelings finally finding expression. Later, as they lay before the fire, wrapped in blankets and each other, Clara traced the scar on Yates's side with gentle fingers. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. "No." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Thanks to you." She smiled, then grew serious. "I wasn't looking for this, you know. After Walter died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now—" Clara propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with an expression that made his breath catch. "Now I think perhaps it was just beginning." Yates pulled her down for another kiss, wishing he could freeze this moment, preserve it against the uncertainties that still waited outside the cabin walls. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping Clara at the ranch. They spent the time talking, planning improvements to the property, and learning each other's bodies with an eagerness that belied their initial hesitation. On the morning of the 4th day, the sun broke through, revealing a world transformed by snow. They stood on the porch, Clara wrapped in one of Yates's coats, his arm around her shoulders. "I need to get back to town," she said reluctantly. "The saloon." "I know." Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "When will you return?" "As soon as I can." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "But Yates, we need to be careful. People will talk." He understood her concern. A widow spending time with her ranch foreman would raise eyebrows in a small town like Veta. "We'll be discreet," he promised. "However you want to handle this, I'll follow your lead." Clara nodded, satisfied. "For now, let's keep this between us, at least until we're sure." She didn't finish the thought, but Yates understood. Until they were sure what this was, what it meant for both of them. Until they were sure his past wouldn't destroy it. "I should tell you everything," he said. "About Harlan, about what I did when I rode with his gang." Clara shook her head. "When you're ready. I'm not going anywhere, Yates." As he watched her ride away that morning, Yates felt both lighter and heavier than he had in years, lighter for having found something he'd thought lost to him forever. Heavier with the knowledge that his past was a threat to that newfound happiness. Spring came to the valley with a rush of green and the busy time of calving. The ranch thrived under Yates's management, with Clara visiting as often as her business in town allowed. Their relationship deepened, though they maintained the pretense of employer and employee when others were present. It was during one of these visits, as they walked along the creek inspecting the new calves, that Clara brought up the subject of their future. "I've been thinking," she said, her hand in his as they navigated the muddy bank. "The saloon takes up so much of my time, keeps me in town when I'd rather be here." "You're considering selling it?" Yates asked, surprised. Clara had always spoken of the saloon with pride. "Not selling, hiring a manager." She stopped, turning to face him. "Walter had managers for most of his businesses. I took over directly after he died because I needed to prove I could to myself as much as anyone. But now, Yates prompted gently. Clara's eyes were clear and direct. "Now I want different things. I want more time here with you." Yates felt a surge of joy, quickly tempered by the reality he'd been avoiding. "Clara, before you make any decisions, there's something you should know." He led her to a fallen log beside the creek, and they sat together as he finally told her everything about the robberies with Harlan's gang, about the people who'd been hurt, about the teller who died in the Trinidad bank. He held nothing back, laying bare the ugliest parts of his past. When he finished, Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching the water rush past. "You know why I helped you that first night?" she finally asked. Yates shook his head. "Because I saw something in your eyes even behind that hat you were hiding behind. Regret. Pain. The look of a man who wanted to be better than his mistakes." She took his hand. "Nothing you've told me changes what I saw then or what I know now." Relief washed through him. "I've been so afraid of bringing danger to your door." "Life is full of dangers, Yates. Some we choose, some choose us." She squeezed his hand. "I'd rather face whatever comes with you than be safe without you." They sealed this understanding with a kiss that felt like a promise, the creek bubbling beside them, new life stirring in the fields around them. That night, as they lay in bed in the cabin, plans for the future taking shape between them, Yates realized he hadn't thought about his hat about hiding in months. Clara had seen him, truly seen him, from that first night on the porch of her saloon, and in being seen, he'd found his way back to himself. Summer brought prosperity to the ranch. The calves grew strong. The improved breeding program Yates had instituted began to show results, and Clara spent more time at the ranch than in town, having hired a capable woman named Margaret to manage the saloon. Word spread through Veta about the widow Montgomery's interest in her northern ranch property and its handsome foreman. Some gossip was inevitable, but most people were genuinely happy for Clara, who had kept to herself since Walter's death. On a warm July evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Yates took Clara's hand. "I've been thinking," he said. She smiled. "A dangerous pastime." "Indeed." He returned her smile, then grew serious. "I love you, Clara. These past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she said softly. Yates took a deep breath. "I want to marry you, to build a life with you right here if you'll have me." Clara's eyes shimmered in the fading light. "Are you asking me, Yates Gallagher?" "I am." He dropped to one knee before her chair. "Clara Montgomery, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They set the date for September, planning a small ceremony at the ranch with only close friends from town in attendance. Yates threw himself into preparations, wanting everything to be perfect for Clara, but fate had other plans. It was August, just 3 weeks before the wedding. Yates was in town picking up supplies, his hat pulled low out of old habit despite the months of peace. As he loaded his wagon outside the general store, a familiar voice froze him in place. Well, if it ain't the traitor himself." Yates turned slowly to find Harlan Reed leaning against a hitching post, flanked by 2 of his men. Reed looked exactly as Yates remembered, tall and lean, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. "Hello, Harlan," Yates said evenly, though his heart was hammering in his chest. Reed pushed away from the post, approaching with the loose-limbed confidence of a predator. Been looking for you for a long time, Yates. You're a hard man to find when you want to be. What do you want? Yates's hand itched for his gun, but he kept it still. Main Street was busy with people going about their business, many of whom he now knew by name. What's rightfully mine? Reed's smile widened. You took money that belonged to the gang, plus interest for the trouble you've caused. Yates thought quickly. He couldn't risk a confrontation here, not with innocent people around, and Clara if Reed discovered his connection to her. Let's discuss this somewhere else, he said, keeping his voice low. Reed laughed. Afraid of making a scene, that's not like you, Gallagher. His eyes narrowed. Heard you've gone respectable, working as a ranch foreman, got yourself a fine lady boss too. Ice shot through Yates's veins. Leave her out of this. Too late for that. Reed gestured to his men. Boys, why don't you go pay a visit to the Montgomery saloon? I hear the owner's a real hospitable lady. Yates moved without thinking, drawing his gun and leveling it at Reed. Call them off, Harlan. Now. People on the street scattered at the sight of weapons, seeking cover in doorways and behind wagons. Reed's men paused, hands hovering over their own guns. You won't shoot me in the middle of town, Reed said confidently. Not with all these witnesses. That's not the respectable rancher way, is it? He was right, and they both knew it. Yates had worked too hard to build a new life, had too much to lose now. What do you want? He asked again. $5,000, Reed replied promptly. That's what you took, plus what I figure is fair compensation for my time. It was an impossible sum, more than the ranch would make in 2 good years. I don't have that kind of money, Yates said. Reed shrugged. Then I guess I'll have to take it out in other ways. He nodded to his men. Go on, boys. Wait. Yates lowered his gun slightly. I can get you 2,000, but I need time. Reed studied him, clearly weighing the offer. 2 days, he finally said. Meet me at the old mining camp west of town. Come alone and bring the money. His smile turned ugly. Or I'll burn down that pretty little saloon with your lady friend inside it. With that, he backed away, his men following, all 3 mounting their horses and riding out of town as if they hadn't just threatened murder in broad daylight. Yates stood frozen, the gun heavy in his hand as the street gradually returned to life around him. Sheriff Thompson approached cautiously from the direction of his office. Everything all right here, Gallagher? He asked, eyeing the gun Yates still held. Yates holstered the weapon. Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff. It's handled. The sheriff didn't look convinced. Those men looked like trouble. They're gone now, Yates said, hoping it was true, at least temporarily. If you'll excuse me, I need to finish my business. He completed loading his supplies with mechanical efficiency, his mind racing. He needed to warn Clara to get her somewhere safe, and he needed money he didn't have. The ride back to the ranch was the longest of his life. When he arrived, he found Clara in the garden she'd started behind the cabin, picking tomatoes in the late afternoon sun. The sight of her, peaceful and unaware of the danger, nearly broke him. Yates, she called cheerfully, spotting him. You're back early. Did you get everything we needed for? She stopped, seeing his expression as he dismounted. What's wrong? He told her everything, watching as concern, then fear, then determination crossed her face. We need to go to the sheriff, she said when he finished. Yates shook his head. Reed doesn't make idle threats, Clara. If we involve the law, he'll retaliate, and not just against me. So what? We just give him what he wants. Her voice rose slightly. $2,000 we don't have. I have some savings, Yates said. About 800. Not enough, but... Clara paced the small garden, thinking. I have money in the bank in Veta, my personal account separate from the business. Another 700 or so. Still not enough. Yates ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Clara stopped pacing, turning to him with a determined expression. I know where we can get the rest." That night, after sending the ranch hands to town with a message for Margaret to close the saloon and stay with friends, Yates and Clara rode to her main house on the outskirts of Veta, a place Yates had never visited. It was a substantial home, reflecting Walter Montgomery's success, though Clara had clearly maintained it with a practical rather than ostentatious hand. Walter kept a safe, she explained as they entered, lighting lamps against the darkness. "Behind a painting in his study. Classic, I know." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The safe yielded just over $500 in cash and several pieces of jewelry. "Will Reed accept these as part of the payment?" Clara asked, holding up a gold pocket watch and chain. Yates nodded. "Harlan's not picky about how he gets paid, as long as it's valuable." They counted out the money, just over $1,500 between their savings and the safe contents. The jewelry would hopefully make up the difference. "I'm coming with you tomorrow," Clara said as they prepared for bed. "Absolutely not," Yates replied firmly. "Reed said to come alone. I won't risk your safety." "And I won't risk losing you," Clara's voice caught. "Not when we're so close to having everything we've dreamed of." Yates pulled her into his arms. "You won't lose me, I promise." But they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. Morning came too quickly. They rode back to the ranch first, where Yates collected his rifle and checked his revolver. The weight of the weapons was familiar in a way that brought back memories he tried to forget. "I'll be at the ridge overlooking the mining camp," Clara said as they prepared to separate. She'd refused to stay behind entirely, compromising by agreeing to stay out of sight. "If anything goes wrong." "It won't," Yates assured her, though they both heard the uncertainty in his voice. "I'll give Reed what we have. It should be enough." Clara reached up, touching his face tenderly. "Come back to me. Always." He kissed her deeply, then turned to mount his horse, unwilling to prolong a goodbye that felt too final. The old mining camp was about an hour's ride west of town, a collection of abandoned shacks and a collapsed mine entrance, remnants of a brief silver strike 15 years earlier. Yates approached cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of an ambush. Reed was waiting outside the largest remaining structure, sitting on a crate and cleaning his fingernails with a knife. His 2 men stood nearby, rifles ready. "Right on time," Reed called as Yates dismounted, keeping his hands visible. "Always were a punctual son of a bitch." "I've got your money," Yates said, untying a saddlebag. "Most of it anyway." Reed's expression hardened. "Most? That wasn't the deal, Gallagher. It's $1,500 in cash plus jewelry worth at least $500. Yates held out the bag. "It's all I could get." Reed nodded to one of his men who took the bag and brought it to him. He counted the money methodically, examined the jewelry with a critical eye, then looked up at Yates. "Not bad," he admitted, "but still short." "It's all I have, Harlan." Reed considered this, then smiled that cold smile that had always meant trouble. "No, it ain't. You've got something else, something valuable." "What are you talking about? That ranch you're running. Heard it's a nice little operation. Belongs to your lady friend, don't it? The widow Montgomery." Yates felt his blood run cold. "The ranch isn't mine to give, but it will be, won't it, once you marry her?" Reed's smile widened at Yates's surprise. "Oh yeah, I know all about your upcoming nuptials. Small towns talk, Gallagher." "Stay away from Clara," Yates warned, his hand drifting toward his gun. Reed's men immediately raised their rifles. Ah, Reed cautioned. "Let's keep this civilized. I'm making you a business proposition." "What proposition?" Yates asked warily. "You sign over your interest in that ranch to me, present and future, and we call it square." Reed spread his hands. "Simple as that." "And if I refuse?" Reed's expression turned ugly. "Then I burn everything you love to the ground." starting with that saloon, moving on to the ranch, and ending with your pretty widow. All because you were too stubborn to pay a debt. Yates's mind raced. He needed time, a way out of this impossible situation. I'd need to talk to Clara, get her to agree to the terms. Do I look like a patient man to you? Reed stood, drawing his gun. No, this ends today. What happened next unfolded in a blur. A shot rang out from the ridge above the camp. Clara's position. One of Reed's men cried out, clutching his shoulder. Reed and his remaining man ducked for cover, while Yates dove behind a water trough, drawing his own weapon. "Kill that bastard!" Reed shouted from behind an overturned cart. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Yates returned fire, trying to keep track of Reed and his men while worrying about Clara's safety. He needed to end this quickly. Moving low, he worked his way toward Reed's position, using the dilapidated buildings for cover. Another shot from the ridge took down Reed's second man, leaving just Harlan himself. "It's over, Harlan," Yates called out. "Sheriff Thompson's probably heard the shooting by now. He'll be bringing men." "Then I've got nothing to lose, do I?" Reed's voice was cold with fury. "Might as well finish what I started." He broke cover suddenly, firing wildly as he charged toward Yates's position. Yates had no choice. He rose, aimed, and fired 3 times in rapid succession. Reed staggered, then fell face first into the dirt, his gun spinning away from his outstretched hand. Silence descended on the mining camp, broken only by the echo of gunshots fading into the mountains. Yates approached Reed's body cautiously, kicking away the fallen man's gun before checking for a pulse. There was none. "Yates," Clara's voice called from the ridge. "Yates, are you all right?" "I'm fine," he shouted back. "Stay there." But she was already picking her way down the slope, rifle in hand. When she reached him, she threw herself into his arms, clutching him tightly. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, pulling back to examine him. "No, you," she shook her head. "When I saw him draw on you, I had to do something." Yates looked at Reed's fallen form, then at the 2 wounded gang members who were now sitting with their backs against a shack wall, hands raised in surrender. It was over. The threat that had hung over him for so long was finally gone. "But at what cost?" "I killed a man, Clara," he said quietly. "Again, just when I thought I'd left that life behind." Clara took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You defended yourself, defended us, our future. The sheriff will hear the truth, from both of us." Her eyes were fierce with determination. "This ends today, Yates, all of it. The running, the hiding, the past. Today we start fresh." In the distance, they could hear horses approaching, likely Sheriff Thompson and a posse from town drawn by the gunfire. Yates looked down at Clara, this remarkable woman who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself, who had seen past the hat he'd hidden behind for so long. "I love you," he said simply. "I know." She smiled up at him. "Now stand tall, no more hiding." Together, they waited for the sheriff, ready to face whatever came next together. The aftermath unfolded better than either of them could have hoped. Harlan Reed's reputation was well known to law enforcement throughout Colorado and neighboring states. The 2 surviving gang members, facing prison, were quick to corroborate Yates's account of Reed's threats and the shootout. Sheriff Thompson, after taking statements and examining the scene, officially ruled the killing self-defense. Yates's past with Reed's gang came to light, but his willingness to testify against the surviving members earned him leniency from the territorial judge. "You've built a good life here, Gallagher," the sheriff told him as they concluded their business at his office. "Seems to me, a man deserves a second chance, especially when he's made as much of it as you have." The wedding took place as planned in September, on a perfect autumn day with golden aspen leaves carpeting the ranch. The ceremony was small but joyful, with friends from town and neighboring ranches in attendance. Clara wore a simple cream-colored dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Yates wore a new black suit and no hat. As they exchanged vows beside the creek where they'd first acknowledged their love, Yates felt a weight lifting the final shreds of the burden he'd carried for so long. "I, Yates, take you, Clara, to be my wife," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to stand beside you in all things, to face whatever comes without hiding, to love you openly and honestly for all the days of my life." Clara's eyes shone with unshed tears as she repeated similar words, adding, "I promise to see you truly see you and to help you see yourself as I do, a good man worthy of love and happiness." The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, food and laughter. As the last guests departed, Yates and Clara stood on the porch of what was now their cabin, their home, looking out at the ranch that would be their future. "Happy?" Clara asked, leaning against his shoulder. Yates wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "More than I ever thought possible." 5 years passed, bringing changes and blessings. The ranch flourished under their joint management, expanding to include neighboring land when it became available. The improved breeding program Yates had instituted made their cattle sought after throughout the territory, commanding premium prices at market. Clara maintained ownership of her properties in town, but visited less frequently as the ranch demanded more of her attention, and as their family grew. Their daughter, Abigail, named for Yates's sister, was born in the spring of their second year of marriage, followed 2 years later by their son, Walter. Honoring Clara's first husband, life wasn't without challenges. Drought struck one summer, forcing them to drive the herd to higher pastures. A particularly harsh winter claimed some of their cattle despite their best efforts. But through it all, they faced each difficulty together, stronger for the trials they'd already overcome. On a warm summer evening in 1884, as they sat on the expanded porch of their now larger home, watching 4-year-old Abigail chase fireflies while little Walter slept in Clara's arms, Yates reflected on the journey that had brought him here. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Clara asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "That night," he said softly, "on your saloon porch, me bleeding, you demanding I pay you to save my life." He smiled at the memory. "If you told me then that this would be my life 5 years later, I'd have thought you were crazy." Clara shifted Walter gently to her other arm. "And now I can't imagine any other life." He reached over to stroke his son's downy head. "Sometimes I still wake up expecting it all to vanish, to find myself back on the run alone." "You're not alone," Clara said firmly. "And you never will be again." Yates nodded, watching as Abigail ran to them, her small hands cupped around a captured firefly. "Look, Papa," she exclaimed, her eyes so like his own wide with wonder. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, leaning down to her level. "But you know what we do with beautiful things that aren't ours to keep, don't we?" Abigail nodded solemnly. "Set them free." She opened her hands, watching as the tiny light rose into the gathering darkness, joining its companions in the dance of summer evening. "That's right," Yates said, ruffling her hair. "We set them free." As he looked up at Clara, their eyes meeting in shared understanding, Yates knew that he too had finally been set free from his past, from his guilt, from the need to hide behind his hat or anything else. In Clara's eyes, in the love they'd built, in the family they'd created, he had found not just redemption but something he'd thought lost forever, a home. "I love you," he said simply. Clara smiled, the same smile that had first pierced his defenses that night on her porch. "I know. And you don't have to hide from me, Yates Gallagher, not ever again." And he never did.